Today, on Rosh Hashanah, right after the blowing of the shofar, we say, Hayom Harat Olam. Today is the birth of creation. And it's so amazing to think of the fact that it is in the present tense, Hayom, today. So it harkens back not only to our appreciation and the anniversary of creation, but that every single day is an opportunity to recreate anew, to make ourselves anew, to see the world with all of its possibilities. That goes for us personally, but it also goes for creation and our part as partners with God in the magnificence of the world in which we live in. And what better place to highlight and to illuminate the magnificence of our creation and our part in it than here in our backyard at Fairchild Tropical Gardens. So excited to share this journey through Fairchild Tropical Gardens to see the magnificence of nature and to hopefully elevate our sense of awe in the world and our responsibility to it. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel said that we are to see the world with radical amazement. How do we see the world with radical amazement? We see it by taking the time to see the intricacies and the perfection of how creation has manifested itself in the world. That's the way we're going to see radical amazement on this Rosh Hashanah, and hopefully every day of the year.
So what we have here is the lotus plant, and you might recognize the flower. It's important in a lot of cultures because the lotus plant grows in muddy, mucky areas that we might not usually consider to be particularly beautiful. But from that mud grows this incredible flower that only blooms for a short period of time. And it is absolutely stunning. But what a lot of people don't know is that the lotus leaf is also an incredible thing. So the lotus leaf grows in the same sorts of areas, obviously with mud and muck, and it has to find a way to keep itself clean because the leaves need to take the power of the sun to turn it into their own food. And you can't really do that through a layer of grime. So the leaves have to find a way to clean themselves. And a rainy day like this is a perfect way to see that. There's teeny tiny little microscopic texture on the surface of this leaf. And so as the water hits it, it actually beads together and pulls that dirt with it. And once the water kind of makes a big puddle like this, it comes off, leaving the leaf perfectly clean and dry. You might be able to see even as these drops are hitting it, they bead up, pull that dirt, and keep it nice and clean. So we are here in the only outdoor model rainforest in the United States. Why is it so important that we look at and study the rainforest? Well, rainforests are the most biodiverse land-based ecosystem. The coral reefs actually have them beat. But biodiversity is having lots of different living things all together. And here in the rainforest, we have so many different kinds of things, both plants and animals. And we can take a look at some of the plants here today. So these plants all have different sizes, shapes, colors, designs that actually help them to survive and help this whole ecosystem work together. So this leaf here that's full of leaves, this hasn't been eaten, this plant hasn't been hurt, that's actually how it grows. And these holes allow water to pass through to the plants that live underneath so that everything gets the water that it needs. These plants over here have this beautiful shape, almost like a very long heart or an arrow with this point at the bottom. And that actually allows the water to drip off. It helps protect this plant so the water doesn't break it or rot this leaf, but it also allows the water to drip down, drip down, drip down to the plants underneath that might otherwise not be getting enough. It's all working together and helping it work as one beautiful piece. So here we can see that life finds a way. We have plants growing on rocks, plants growing on other plants, plants growing up in the sky, plants growing below the ground where we can't even see them. But every single one of them has a role in this bigger ecosystem and has found a way to survive in what seems like impossible situations. Now this is some people's most favorite tree. because this is the cacao tree. This is where chocolate comes from. Now that doesn't mean you can just reach up and pick a chocolate bar off the trees. That's not quite how it works. But this tree produces a pod that has little tiny beans inside that eventually become the chocolate we know and love, an incredible sweet treat from nature. But to get that treat, we actually need something that we might normally think of as a pest. A teeny tiny little gnat, like those little flies that sometimes fly around your head, is the pollinator of the cacao tree. It has these teeny tiny little flowers on the tree that only those tiny bugs can really pollinate. So no flies, no chocolate. It's all connected. So these might not look like much, these kind of weird plants growing on a tree. Well, one very important note, these are epiphytic, they're epiphytes, not parasites. What that means is these guys are just hanging out here. They're not hurting the tree, they're not stealing anything from the tree. They just need a place to live and a place to sit. So these plants are actually orchids. And most people think of orchids as those big, beautiful flowers, which is true. But orchids come in all shapes and sizes. And you can actually find orchids all over the world. There are orchids that are native to Siberia, not just to those beautiful tropical climates that we think of. So orchids can grow on other plants, they can grow in the ground. We have orchids that are native here to South Florida. But sometimes they don't look quite the way we think. But when they bloom, they are absolutely spectacular. So this plant here is another thing that you can find in the rainforest. And there's a few things that I think make it really unique. One is while the front of the leaf is green, like we think of most plants, the back is actually bright red. So it makes it kind of fun, a little flashy, but this is actually helping this plant to survive. The rainforest is surprisingly dark, so it's helping this plant to absorb as much sunlight as it possibly can and make its own food. But this plant also has this really beautiful swirl. You can find math in nature, and this shape is actually pretty much exactly the Fibonacci swirl, the perfect sequence, as some people might call it, and you can find that perfection in nature. So this is our edible garden, and these plants come from all around the world. And the foods that we eat, not only do they come from all around the world, but so many of them come from the earth. Almost everything that we consume originally started as some sort of plant. And most of these plants started their lives somewhere else. Plants are not only food. Most cultures use plants as medicine as well. This right here is rosemary and has been used for all sorts of medicinal purposes across time. Plus, it makes things taste a little better. So our food can be medicine, but the way that we make our food is also so important and can be medicine. Scientists have found that just the act of growing plants, of interacting with the earth, can make you feel better, help ease depression. But the way that we make our food can also be harmful. So it's so important for us to consider how we are growing our plants. What practices are we using? Where are we getting our food from? How are we consuming it? And how can we do it in a way that respects these plants, the cultures that these plants came from, and the growing of our nutrition? So what we have here is we are in our pine rockland ecosystem. And the pine rocklands used to be what covered almost all of South Florida. Unfortunately, there's only a tiny fraction of pine rocklands left outside of Everglades National Park. And the parts that are left of our native pine rocklands are fragmented, which means they're just tiny little blips here, there, not really connected. And unfortunately, that is not great for our native animals, our native pollinators, because they kind of have to try to get from one little skipping stone to another to be able to find food, to be able to find shelter. And so this fragmentation of our pine rocklands is a huge problem, both for our native plants and for our native animals. And this little guy right here is a real trooper. This is the Atala caterpillar. And that bright red does give us a little warning. It's telling us he'd like to be left alone, so I'm not going to mess with him too much. But these caterpillars become the Atala butterfly, which is a stunning native pollinator with an iridescent blue sparkle on it. And this caterpillar is incredibly picky. It only eats this one plant, the kunti, the only native cycad to North America. And unfortunately, because of bad farming practices, the kunti was struggling, and unfortunately, the Atala population took a nosedive. Now, through incredible conservation work and partnerships, Fairchild and a lot of other organizations work together to help bring back these cycads and bring back these Atala butterflies, which are now all over South Florida. Hopefully you can spot one for yourself. But they are an incredible pollinator and a part of our native history. This gorgeous plant here is called the American beautyberry, and I'm pretty sure you can guess how it got its name. This plant is another native to our pine rockland ecosystem, and it's really important, not just because it's one of the more stunning additions to this environment, but because these berries are an important food source for birds, small animals, even deer. And back when people were settling South Florida, this was frequently used as a jam or a jelly to get through the hard months here in Florida. But this plant is important not only to the humans in the environment, but definitely to the whole ecosystem. Even more important, though, is this guy right here. This is our Dade County pine, and this is an incredibly important part of our pine rockland, again, if you can guess from the name. And this tree has some incredible properties to it. People used to build their houses from it all the time because you might be able to tell it has this incredibly thick bark. Well, this tree is fire resistant because fires sweep through the pine rocklands. It's actually an incredibly important part of keeping this ecosystem happy and healthy. It's a pyrogenic, a fire-loving ecosystem. And this tree is basically wearing a fire blanket around it so that it can get through those fires. You might even notice that the branches aren't up until much higher up, above where the fire might be. This tree is also bug resistant, so you're not going to find a lot of insect damage on these trees. And the wood is so dense that it actually sinks. So why aren't we using this to make our houses now? Well, unfortunately, because this ecosystem has been so terribly damaged and so disturbed, these trees are protected now, luckily, so that they can keep kind of providing the role that they are needed for in their ecosystem. Hopefully someday we'll have enough Dade County pine that we have a little extra, but right now, unfortunately, that is not the case. So I am surrounded right now by native wildflowers and plants. And they might not look like much right now because we are kind of at the tail end of summer, but this right here is a native orchid and all sorts of really important native wildflowers. And if you would like some beautiful native wildflowers in your own backyard, you can actually join the Connect to Protect network. What that is it's an initiative to try to get smaller pine rockland gardens throughout South Florida so that things like pollinators don't have to go so far to find a food source or find shelter. So you can actually contact us and receive free native plants to help try to bridge some of these gaps in our pine rockland ecosystems. This is the lignum vitae, which is Latin for wood or tree of life. And this tree has some incredible properties. Not only is it the national tree of the Bahamas, but this plant has incredible medicinal purposes and has been used historically for a range of purposes. Because of the density of the wood, the oils in the wood, this has been prized for how long-lasting and strong it is, and with nothing added, just as this tree naturally grows. Plus, it's pretty gorgeous.
While we're here at the Tree of Life, I thought I would share with you that in Genesis, God says to Adam, I place you here in the Garden of Eden to do two things. One, le'ovdah, to work it, to till it, to enable it to grow and to create, and to l'shomra, to guard it and to protect it. So we have responsibility in this world to do both the tilling and the creating and the protecting and to guarding of our natural world in which we live.
So here we are in a mangrove tangle, and I hope all of you have had the chance, the experience to see mangroves up close and personal. If you haven't, I highly recommend getting out and doing so, because these are native to South Florida, to a lot of places, but they are so important to our Florida coastlines. These plants basically form a barrier. Hopefully you can see here, the tangle of roots is basically creating a strong structure, a barrier against erosion, and what it allows is for the shoreline to build up, keeping that erosion from going away. But also, these trees are now connected, strong. I don't know if you ever played the playground game Red Rover, where it's really easy to push over one person, but you get a whole bunch of people with arms linked, a lot harder to push over. Same thing with these trees. So when things like tropical storms or hurricanes hit, these trees are creating a shield, a barrier for us, helping slow down the winds, helping keep our coastline safe. Now, as I tell the kids, obviously a tree isn't going to make a hurricane go, oh no, I'm not going to hit here and run away. But it is physically slowing down those winds and protecting our coastline. Not only that, but just on a day-to-day, the tangle of those roots provides a safe place for fish and aquatic mammals and birds to lay their eggs, to have a safe place. These are basically living nurseries for our whole ecosystem, both land and water-based. And we need to protect these mangroves. So you might notice that the water looks red. You might think, oh, well, that means that this is a dirty, gross kind of water. These trees are making the water, ooh. That's actually not quite true. These are red mangroves, and they partially get their name because when they drop their leaves, those leaves basically are staining the water, just like tea leaves would stain your teacup a little bit, right? So it's not making the water dirty, it's just changing the color a little bit as those leaves drop down. This is actually pretty clean water. And these trees are helping to protect this whole space, and we need to help protect them. So this is a baobab. This is actually a baby baobab. This tree is about 100 years old, but baobabs can live to be 1,000 years old. These plants are native to Madagascar, an island off the coast of Africa. And these trees, if you've ever seen the movie The Lion King, this was that tree of life that Rafiki lived in. Why do they get that name? Well, because where these trees grow, they go through incredible series of droughts and then monsoons, droughts and monsoons. And during the rainy season, these trees are almost like a sponge inside, and they will soak up massive amounts of water. And then during the dry season, they're full of water, and they become essentially a watering hole for the animals. Elephants will actually come up to this tree and bore their tusks in, making holes on the surface that other animals can then come and get water from this tree. This tree can expand and contract so much that you can actually see stretch marks on these trees. And these trees can get so big that people have carved them out to make post offices. There's a jail inside of a baobab. You can use these trees for so many incredible things. The fruits are believed to have medicinal purposes. The leaves have incredible nutrition to them. So this tree is truly a tree of life.